Hello, this is Faith at Faith&books. Let me see if I can adjust this. Okay, I'm going to talk fast because I tried to make this before. My phone keeps cutting off. So I finally finished Don Quixote Volume 1. I said that I had done that a couple weeks ago. I was wrong, but I finally finished it. And I have some thoughts. And I'm going to title this video Reading Don Quixote as a Catholic because there are certain elements that really jumped out at me, and I think it's because I'm seeing it through this particular worldview. So the first thing is the character of Don Quixote himself. So Don Quixote is this older man who has a huge library of books all about chivalry, the days of knights errant, whatever. And he loves that world. He's submerged himself in that world, and he's decided, it's turned his head. He's delusional, and he's decided that he is a knight errant. And so he's very concerned with getting dressed up. He finds old armor, and he sort of he cobbles together this sort of makeshift costume, and he gets an old, skinny, tired horse, but he thinks that she's the steed, his steed, and he goes out into the world, and chaos ensues because, of course, the days of knight errantry are gone, and nobody's a knight errant anymore, and he isn't a knight errant, right? He just isn't. But I think this speaks to today's take, because we're very, very relativistic these days, and we're very into self-invention and identity. And so here we have Don Quixote identifying as a knight errant, and a lot of the premise of the book, a lot of the comedy comes from him being out in the world and people's response. What ensues from him interacting with people in the world because he's got this delusion of his identity. And I think this is a cautionary tale for us today, because what happens when you're not grounded in reality, when it's all about how you want to invent yourself or the identity that you want to create for yourself, and then you want the whole world to conform to that, it's a very destabilizing thing. And you might be somebody because there are people who meet Don Quixote and they kind of enable him because they don't want to deal with it, or they're not quite sure what's going on. They want to be nice. But that's furthering the delusion, right? That's not the best way to deal with somebody who's having issues like that. So, and we see Don Quixote respond, or we see how people respond. So somebody who doesn't believe him and doesn't accept him and tells him that he's crazy, or he's out of his wits, he immediately violently attacks them. He hits them over the head, or he just attacks him because it triggers him, and he thinks he's being this just warrior. He thinks he's being this warrior, and he's going out there, and how dare these people deny his calling, his quest? How dare they do that? And they must be evil, and therefore he attacks them violently. So there's that. Then there's the people that don't know what to think, and they kind of go along with him. There's two running characters, the curate and the barber, who at first they try to reduce the influences, especially the curate, because there's this whole thing about book burning, because he's trying to get rid of this library that's turned Don Quixote's head. So they're trying to help him that way. And then they decide, later on when they meet up with him again, they decide to just go along with it, but then they're going to trap him and bring him home and try to help him that way. So they're going along with it just to be because they think that the means justifies the end, basically. And then you have people who are just confused, like poor Sancho Panza, his squire, is just confused. He's simple, he's gullible. Don Quixote has authority over him, and so what he says must be true, right? Plus he's promising him all these things, that he's going to have his own island, he's going to be governor of his own island or whatever. And Sancho Panza is concerned with money because he's got a wife and kids, and he's poor, and he wants to feed that wife and kids. So he's got different concerns than Don Quixote, who's always had wealth or never had to worry about those things, so he's not concerned with money. But you have poor Sancho Panza, and Sancho Panza doesn't know what's real anymore. Like he's a peasant. He starts out saying, "Well, I know what's real." He has that common sense, but then he gets really confused. So you have these gullible people who get really confused. Then you have people who are making fun of Don Quixote, right? Because they think he's a fool, and they're laughing at him. So all these different responses, but none of them are good responses, right? They're all, in some way, a form of deception or a form of delusion, or you're grappling with somebody else's insistence that black is white and white is black or whatever. It's a very destabilizing thing. So there's two elements to Don Quixote. There's this one of Don Quixote, of the book Don Quixote. There's the character of Don Quixote who is delusional and going out in the world, and chaos and comedy ensue. And then you have the stories that are told along the way. So they're meeting people along the way, and people are telling stories about themselves, or they're just telling stories. And these have a reoccurring theme. So first of all, there's this reoccurring thing of people leaving their towns or villages and going out into the countryside to be shepherds or shepherdesses or goat herds, or they're just going out to live as hermits in the wilderness area. And they're doing it because they're fleeing heartbreak, because something has happened to their love story, their romance, that has driven them away. And this is a reoccurring theme. And you have, like, the first one is, and I can't remember the woman's name, but she gives this great speech. There's Don Quixote and Sancho Panza meet up with this guy they meet up with a friend of a guy who's just passed away. He's just died, and he pined away for love of this woman, whose name, of course, I didn't bring the book with me or anything. And she gives this great speech, because they're all blaming her. They're all saying, you're a murderess because, you didn't love this guy. He loved you so much he pined away. But she makes this great speech, and I'm going to paraphrase it very, very poorly and very, very briefly. She says, "You're not being fair. I didn't fall in love with him. Do you want me to pretend to be in love with him? I haven't fallen in love with anybody yet. I'm beautiful, and all these men are bothering me because I'm beautiful, and they're all saying they're in love with me, but I'm not in love with them. Maybe one day I'll meet somebody and I'll fall in love. But right now, I'm so sick of being harassed by you guys and being blamed for breaking hearts when I have no intention to do that, that I just want to go off and be by myself and be a shepherdess." And so she makes this great speech. So that's the first thing we see. And a lot of this romance, it's either echoes or reflects the same kind of delusion, this high idea of romance that Don Quixote himself has, or it's just about sort of men oppressing women. So I'm finding the book surprisingly feminist in that way, and that because first of all, this woman gets to give this great speech about how unfair the men are being to her, but then in every story, it's always about the woman who's in love with somebody, and either the father or the husband or the would-be husband, the would-be lover, does something oppressive. So, because women are caught in this situation where they have to obey their father, and if their father says they should marry this guy, but they're in love with this other guy, they're caught in this terrible situation that's going to lead to heartbreak. Or there's a couple of stories that really stood out for me. One was the story of this guy Lothario, and I can't remember the name of his friend. It was either Anselmo or Alfonso. And Anselmo, gets married to Clarissa. And he's been besties with Lothario for many, many years. And he gets this delusion that he wants to prove that his wife is virtuous, that she is faithful and virtuous. And he says to Lothario, "I know she is, but I'm just obsessed with this idea of testing her." And so Lothario gives this wonderful talk, which is exactly what the Catholic Church is teaching on marriages. That's what he gives. He gives this wonderful response saying why this is such a bad idea for Anselmo Alfonso to do this to his wife. why it's so wrong, but he can't convince him. And so he decides to go along because he figures he can do sort of damage control, because he realizes his friend is really playing with fire and he's going to really destroy his life. But what happens is Lothario succumbs to temptation and he actually falls in love with the wife, Clarissa, and they have an affair. So sorry, spoilers. So, but reading it as a Catholic, when I read Lothario's defense of why this was such a bad idea to test his wife, it was exactly the teachings, and it's the same teachings today as it was, back then. So the Catholic Church has not changed in its belief in the sacredness of marriage and what its purpose is and why it's a good thing, and that it was something divinely instituted by God and man cannot change it. It's not something that is changeable. So that was really interesting. And the other really interesting story that, oh my gosh, I'm already being able to talk longer than last time because last time I cut off at 7 minutes, so I better hurry up. The next really interesting story that also involved this romantic theme was this captain they meet at the inn who tells the story of his beloved Zoraida. And that story actually echoed Cervantes, the author's story, because he fought in the Battle of Lepanto, where the Ottoman Turks were trying to invade Italy and the Papal States. And it was this big battle, and they were repulsed. And Cervantes was actually a soldier in that. And then on the way home, he got captured. I forget if it was by Turks or by Barbary pirates or something. He was captured and enslaved and held for ransom. And I think he was enslaved for a number of years before, I think it was his sister managed to raise money to free him. So the captain's story reflects that experience of Cervantes, but he's got this romantic thing where he meets this beautiful woman, kind of comes out of nowhere and saves him from his captivity. And that was really interesting. And the other thing about the fathers and the way they're controlling their daughters is that the most sympathetic father turns out to be the Muslim father of Zoraida. I thought he was really interesting. So I thought that was saying something. The whole book is just replete with slapstick humor, bathroom humor, screwball comedy, irony, puns. Every type of humor is just, and he's just taking such a askance view of so many things. I really am enjoying it very much. And the last thing I want to say is, one of the things is sometimes Don Quixote is very astute and sometimes he's delusional. And so you're always off balance because you never quite know. And the first volume, I'm just talking about the first volume, was published in 1605. And then Hamlet came out in 1607. And I remember when I read this before, I read an abridged version before, that the second volume was really interesting because it just riffed off of Hamlet. So somehow, and Hamlet has that same idea. You don't know if Hamlet's crazy or not, whether he's faking it or whether he really is. And I'm looking forward to reading that because there is so much in Don Quixote. It's the same kind of stories and things going on that you see in Shakespeare comedies or tragedies, and that it kind of reminds me of like opera stories where so much is going on, all this conflict and complications and everything. It's really reflects that type of story. So. Anyway, I'm enjoying it. I'm glad that I got to record this whole thing. I hope I was somewhat coherent. I was trying to talk really fast. Anyway, I hope you were doing well, and happy reading. Bye.